Good afternoon, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. This is episode 121, and we're joined by two repeat guests. We are joined by Zac Hyden, the Mad Redneck, and we're joined by Jae Carico. Jae Carico has been on several times. Zac Hyden, this will be his second time around on Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. Hyden obtained his PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, and he also was the executive director of the Automotive Free Clinic, which is based in Prattville, Alabama. Carico previously ran for the U.S. Senate out of the state of Tennessee in 2018 as an anarchist. And he also has some involvement, from what I've researched, on this upcoming 2024 presidential campaign with the Claudia de la Cruz, Karina Garcia campaign, the PSL, Party for Socialism and Liberation. I'm assuming some kind of volunteering. I'm sure we're going to learn more about what's going on with Carico and those developments. And Carico just has a history of organizing, and we're going to also overlap this with the conversation, organization, strategies, labor movements. There's just a lot going on in that regards, and per Hyden's recommendation, this would be a great way to kind of enhance the importance of May Day. So we can call this informally the May Day episode. But I just want to say to Zac Hyden, the Mad Redneck, and Jae Carico, welcome back to the show, and we can't wait to have this conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Very exciting stuff. And before we get started, the audience probably already know who you all are beforehand, but we're still going to talk about you all's relationship, how you all got to know each other. Brief advertisement, support independent media. This is a truly independent platform. I'd like to see myself as an independent platform. Sure, I have my own views, my own ideologies, but overall, we reach across the aisle, talk to lots of different types of people. This is an international community. We have about 44% of the audience represented outside of the United States. That was always the purpose, to have global perspectives, not just local and national perspectives, but just to give an all-around experience. This is a culture forum and also a political forum. So some people may not like the political content. They only watch the cultural stuff. And I don't tell people what to do. If you get something out of it, I recommend you share this with your friends and family. Tell them to subscribe for free. Just spend a little bit of your time with us. I don't want a dime from you. Just expand your mind a little bit. And remember, you can't unthink free thought. And that's the best way I can tell people. There have been some donations. And if you do want to donate, there's a money icon there if you want to send a super sticker. But again, that's totally up to you. There's not going to be a paywall ever. All the information is free to the public. Let's get started with the conversation. And since the audience more or less know who you are already, I want to know personally how you all know each other and how you came across paths. And you all can start, whoever wants to go first, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to stay here in the background and listen to how you all met in the first place.
If Zac wants to go first, my dog's barking, so I'm gonna let her in.
I don't remember how we met. Like I know we've known each other about 10 years. But we met online somewhere, some conversation, some online conversation, and we started talking in Messenger. And then, I mean, me and Jay have talked about our families, and it's a real friendship. It's not just about politics, it is a real friendship. We've talked about things that we've gone through in our lives and helped each other with that sort of stuff. So, me and Jay are a bit different. Jay is more Marxist-Leninist. I'm more anarchist, but I'm not like some anarchists in that I have this huge issue with Marxist-Leninists. I don't call them authoritarian communists. Marxist-Leninist is a potential solution. Nothing has worked thus far. And so we need to try as many things as possible. And Marxist-Leninism is one solution. And, my version of anarchism is a solution. And we can discuss that cordially here, but do you remember how we met, Jay?
So,
Damn, for real, y'all can do this stuff, and now I'm just teasing.
I know that I do remember actually how we met. It was through somebody at UAB who I had spoke there at a conference at some point. They found me because they wanted to introduce me to Mercutio Southall, who was an activist in Alabama. And I think that somehow in that, we got to know each other. We found each other on Facebook at some point, in social media and stuff like that. And then, of course, later on, we worked on Guillotine Press, where you were releasing your book, and we released it together.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mercutio is a great dude. I mean, he is a great dude. And that is right. That's how we met. That I do remember that now. So we've kept in touch. We talk on Facebook from time to time. I don't think I've ever met you in person, but we've always like kind of chit-chatted on Facebook about politics and life and that sort of stuff. And Mercutio, it's probably been about 10 years. It's probably been about 10 years that we've known each other, for sure. And 15 to 20 friends that I've been friends with over a decade, and I got 3 friends that I've been friends with for 25 years. And I've been friends with them and their families for over 25 years. So, I'm big on friendships. I like being friends with people. So it's cool. We've known each other a while.
Okay, and just to clarify for my audience who may be new to the realm of politics, Zac mentioned that he was an anarchist and that Jay was more of a Marxist-Leninist. Can you explain, I guess in layman's terms, what that means to the general audience? Because a lot of people, they aren't really into the ideology, I guess, for a lack of a better word. And so I think it would be important to explain to the audience what that means exactly, or what's your version or idea of what that is.
Yeah, to me, the difference between Marxist-Leninism and anarchism is just scale. Like Marxist-Leninism looks at large-scale democracy, whereas anarchism looks at small-scale democracy. And to me, if you have a Marxist-Leninist organization and an anarchist organization that are actually doing work on the ground, they're going to look very similar right now because we don't have large institutions that can, take over a country, get people elected, that sort of stuff. So right now, all of the Marxist-Leninist institutions are going to be small, and all of the anarchist institutions are going to be small, and they're going to look very similar on the ground now than they may look in the future.
And I think it's interesting that even the Bolsheviks in when they had the second Russian Revolution, they were only 600 at that point in time. Now, lots and lots of people took part in the revolution, and there had been a previous revolution, but it was the women who actually started the Russian Revolution. I think that there's a lot of things that we have in common in terms of our critique of capitalism, our belief that we want a classless, stateless, moneyless society at some point in time. I think that I think that the only maybe difference I would have is that I do think that some things have worked. It's just that they've been extremely repressed from the very beginning and had to go in different routes because of the international situation, et cetera, et cetera. But comparatively to other places, I would say they worked better. Like it had like 99% illiteracy, and then within like 40 years, it was like having the same calorie intake as the U.S. and was industrial. So I think there had or 800 million people out of poverty, et cetera. But I do think that there's also some anarchist movements. I think they're inspirational. I think they're powerful. I think that that they can change people's lives. So yeah, I think that there's not really a contention there, other than a lot of times on Facebook. Really, I think that there is good time for having those differences of opinion hashed out and stuff like that and discussed, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, we're on the same page when it comes to a lot of things.
And I'm just
Yeah, I think, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no. Continue with your thoughts, Zach.
No, I agree. I agree with Jay. I think we agree on more than we disagree on. I mean, for me, the basic root of all transformative activism is serve the people and democracy. And to me, if you're trying to do that, if you're trying to serve the people and you're trying to have democratic structures, I really don't have a problem. It's when you get into like serving yourself and having top-down authoritarianism, that's when I have a problem with whatever type of institution it is. And most of our institutions in the United States serve themselves and are top-down authoritarian. So that's sort of my contention with global society at this point in time, is how institutions are organized. And with the AFC, look, everybody who worked in the AFC except me wouldn't categorize it as an anarchist institution. It's only me who would have categorized it that way. Nobody else would have said that. They would have called it a religious ministry or, a community service or something like that. That's fine. Like nobody has to be like me. But if you look at it, that's what it was about, which was service and a democratic internal structure.
I'm just curious, regardless of being a Marxist-Leninist or an anarchist, for instance, I don't know exactly how I personally identify. I would just say I'm definitely a part of the left, but it's more or less an independent left at this point, I guess. But just being from the South, what has been some of the reception when you tell people these things, or do you even share this information at all with certain family members? I'm just curious, what's the reception, and what are people's initial impressions when you're describing this type of stuff to them as far as politics?
Well, I'm going to go a little Marxist on you and say that I share what the material base is, but I don't share the ideological superstructure. So that's a way of saying that. That's a way of saying that I try to build institutions that do certain things that serve the community. I bring people in to work in those institutions to do things that serve the community, but I let them decide how they think about it. Like how the working class wants to interpret what they're doing is none of my business, and it shouldn't be dictated by me. I'm a worker. I can think about it in certain ways, but different workers can think about it in certain ways. And really, if we're going to do this, we should get workers in institutions and allow them to determine what we say about what those institutions do. It should be worker autonomy doing this type of stuff, and it shouldn't be a top-down process where I go in and say, hey, we're going to do anarcho-communism, y'all jump on board. Nah. Hey, let's fix some cars, let's serve the community, let's work together, and then let everybody else decide how they're going to think about it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think ideology is meant to be developed to a point based on the material conditions that exist. I think that that whole process democracy, in my estimation, from what I understand, is where you develop from there. Okay, let me use an analogy real quick. If you have a lawnmower, everybody probably, just about, not everybody, but most people are going to take at some point in their life and mowing lawns, right? Most working class people. And but not everybody has to know how a lawnmower works. Some people nerd out about this stuff, and they really like doing it. And they really want to know how a lawnmower works, and they want to do it as a second job almost to their own job. This is the same with political science, right? Not everybody nerds out about that stuff, and not everybody's passionate about it. And most people just won't be, and that's okay. What whole process democracy wants to do is to find the people who are super interested. They keep their regular job, but they also go to people who are in their workplace, and they have a job to analyze it. They have to, as part of their job, right? Now, in that workplace, in a whole process democracy, what may be called Soviet democracy, what would happen is you would vote for a representative from your workplace. Somebody who'd been there, a while, and this would be similar to a union steward you can think of. Somebody who's, who you feel like knows it, does a good job, can answer those questions, but also is there for the people and looking out for everybody else. And the way you kind of determine this is every 5 years or so, you're taking part in legislation on your workplace level, because you're part of the 5-year plan. Now, from there, if you become a foreman, if you've been voted as worker representative, you can essentially become a mayor, and you can be called back at any time, but only if you've been a worker representative. Now, if you become the mayor, so to speak, then you can be elected to governor. And if you're a governor and you're part of that group of people who is super nerded out about political science, and you've taken that second job, you can also be part of the Democratic Central Committee, which helps to lay out the actual legislation from the voice of the workers. But it has to be a whole process. And there are, for instance, in China, 8 parties that they're not communist parties. And they do have legislation. They have say in autonomous zones and in the areas that they're in. They have a certain amount of autonomy in how they carry out the 5-year plan, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that even the CIA talks about Stalin as not being a dictator in the way that the West has laid him out to be, in the sense that he did have 400 proposals that did not get 800 proposals that were denied. He did try to step down several times. And so when I say this, I always say this to say that there's a dictatorship of the rich right now, and it represses the working class. And in the dictatorship of the workers, it wouldn't be a top-down thing. I don't think Zac's saying that per se. I think that I'm just saying to make a caveat that it would be the workers organizing things and having a say much more so than they do now. It's just that there are certain people who nerd out about this stuff, and they're going to be the ones who want to engage with the more precise aspect and take on a second job of engaging with it, as so to speak.
Yeah, and I agree that is a form of democracy. I'm going to give you the polar opposite in form of democracy, which is pirate communism. And that's almost no structure at all. And the captain, everybody has a role that they know on the ship, so to speak. And the captain, it's very small. There's tops 30 to 40 people. The captain can be mutinied at any time for any reason. And that type of structure was developed as a way to defeat colonialism in the seas. So, I think when we're thinking about what type of structure, democratic structure we want to employ, we got to think about what we're trying to do and who the people are within those structures. So, the rednecks that I work with, they don't really like being told what to do. They don't really like having somebody above them, and they like to sort of know their role and to do their job. And the way I had always thought about the AFC was a sort of pirate communism, in the sense that I was the leader, but that was a role I played on the ship. That wasn't me being up here and somebody else being down there. Now, look, you can have hierarchical democracies. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying that's one structure, and there are other structures that may be effective for doing other types of things.
Yeah, and I think it really is about also, like you said, the material conditions and national characteristic of and as PSL, just to say what they say on the matter, is that after the workers' revolution, any marginalized group of people is free to form their own independent nation. And I think that in your book and in your work, you clearly and eloquently lay out that Appalachia has much more in common with a third world, global South nation than it does with the rest of the U.S. Let's say, so I think that we can look historically in the U.S. at Black Reconstruction, at the Black Belt, I see Du Bois as I consider myself a Marxist-Leninist Du Boisist, because that's our national character. That's where we develop our understanding. That's where we have a revolutionary nature in our country, even though that initial revolution did have a bourgeois character. At the same time, there was Shays Rebellion. There was all the other things happening that are revolutionary, slave rebellions, workers' rebellions, farmers' rebellions, miners' rebellions, all throughout our history, especially in the South. That is, a general strike of 1.5 million people who had to fight. 4 million enslaved people stood up, and that's so amazing that they were under conditions that were so much more extremely worse than ours. That gives me great revolutionary optimism because I know we can. How are we organized?
Yeah, Black Reconstruction in America is the best book on race in America ever written, in my opinion. It is one of my favorite books, and the argument of the book is that Black soldiers led a working class revolution that established a dictatorship of the proletariat in the form of Reconstruction institutions in the South. That's W.B. Du Bois' main argument. It puts the right point of view on the Civil War, and I agree with Jay that a lot of this stuff is happening in the South. Jay didn't mention this, but this is something that I always think about: is the populist movement in the South between right after Reconstruction ended into the 1890s. And so you have the populist movement in the South, which was black and white farmers, and some people that worked in Birmingham. In Alabama, it was some people who worked in the industrial city of Birmingham after 1871. But it was black and white together fighting against the planters and the industrialists. And the amazing thing about the movement was that movement would have won numerous gubernatorial elections in Alabama if those elections hadn't been outright stolen from them. And there's actually, when Alabama created the 1901 Redeemer Constitution, so you got the populist movement, 1880, 1890, 1901 Redeemer Constitution. One of the framers of the Constitution says basically we have to disenfranchise poor and black people because if we keep stealing the elections, we're going to go to hell. So they just basically, we're going to do it legally. And that 1901 Redeemer Constitution is the structural backbone for Jim Crow. So what Jim Crow really was an institutional tactic by planters, industrials to divide the threat of the working class based on race that happened in the 1880s and 1890s. And we don't hear that discussion of Jim Crow. We just hear the racial side of it. But it was actually a capitalist institutional arrangement to ensure that black and white people never fought back again. And that has worked. Since then, that has worked. Black and white people in the South have not gotten on the same page since then. And we need to redevelop these kind of familial type connections between black and white workers so that we can have that type of resistance again.
I guess my question, and that's a very curious observation, and thanks for detailing the history. I had a question. Jay, you referred to a book that Zac had written. What is the name of that book? What's the title for the audience to get that info?
Diary of a Mad Redneck.
Diary of a Mad Redneck?
Memoirs of a Mad Redneck.
Memoirs of a Mad Redneck, authored by Zac Hyden. And don't you have an upcoming book? You're working on one?
Yeah, my book that I'm working on is called Redneck Liberation Theology, The Upright Men. And it is about the virtues of redneck men. Mostly about the virtues of redneck men. Let me just put it that way.
And my question to that observation about the working class, that comment, well, what about the workers? They don't seem to be on the same page. I mean, let alone, black and white workers. You said that black and white workers need to ban, but I don't even know if you can say that the working class is actually together. You know what I mean? Like
So
when you talk about Black people just working together, I mean, we got to start there first. You know, we got to be able to
I
work
agree.
together with each other, within each other first, for that to even happen.
Yeah, I think that. So go ahead, Jay. Go ahead, Jay.
So
Go ahead.
to kind of double answer your last question a little bit about how I speak to workers personally, and to kind of answer your question about this, I think that right now we have kind of you know, in any situation to analyze where people's heads are at based on what information they're taking, you know, for the most part, and by talking to them, you know, and discussing with them, and finding that rational kernel of truth, finding that one thing that they kind of get, and you can go, oh, and then tease out these things that they've already experienced themselves, and just put it in language, in a framework that lets them see past the nonsense. If they're talking crap about Democrats, that's what I usually just join them, and then I move on to, but does Trump know what it's like to be working class? Or I go on to, you know, if they're talking crap about Republicans, I'll talk to them about that, but then I'll say like, well, why do the Democrats continually do these things? Why historically have they worked with these groups, et cetera, et cetera? And I kind of try and just historically develop to a point where people aren't. I don't come at them as anything but pro worker, so they're not going to.
Be
I'm
defensive.
going to take what their rational kernel of truth is and help them to develop from whatever they bring me. Like if they bring me a certain American sentimentalism, I'm going to tell them that Benjamin Franklin started the first abolitionist newspaper. I'm going to tell them Thomas Paine wrote about the French Revolution and was very, you know, I'm going to talk to them about whatever they need me to talk to them about that moment that's going to help them get to the point where they're against the opulent minority. They realize corporations control, lobbyism controls 90% of legislation, and the only thing we have is our labor, which builds everything, to be able to fight back and hold leverage.
I kind of got to disagree a little bit with Jay on this one, because I think that the working class knows its history. But I think what is lacking is a political program that could forge the working class into a political actor. And to me, I think we need to look at the global South for that political program, and because the American South and the global South are essentially the same. So I think we need to look at the global South for that program, and that program is land reform and reparations. Land reform for the working class and reparations for Black and Indigenous people. And when I talk to rednecks about this program, they're on board. Now, they don't think it'll ever happen, but they agree in principle that that is a fair program for the South. Now, I think that's pretty big. I think that's pretty big to be like, you know, Black folks and Indigenous folks are going to get reparations, and rednecks are like, yeah, I'm on board with that, because everybody gets something. Black and Indigenous people get more. And rednecks think that's fair. They say, yeah, what's happened to Black and Indigenous people is worse than what's happened to us, but we didn't do it. We didn't do it. That's our thing. That's what we say. We say we didn't do it. And I think that's accurate. I think it is accurate that we didn't do it. So I think that that political program for the South could forge the working class into a political actor, and everybody ain't got to agree. That's the great thing about it. Everybody ain't got to be like on the same page with identitarian stuff. Everybody ain't got to be on the same page religiously. Everybody ain't got to be on the same page on everything. All we got to be on the same page is let's get some land and let's get some money and let's build a new society.
I guess
I don't think we can do that.
I get questions based on that, Zach. And then Jay, if you want to respond, and I know you were about to say something, but I had to get this in because before I forget about it. So you mentioned a lot there. You compared the South, the U.S. South, to the global South. And I know that that's been explained in our previous episode 89, so the audience can go back and watch the episode 89 with Zac Hyden, the Mad Redneck. I think that title threw off so many people. There was a lot of response to that interview in particular, because the constant trope was basically oh, this person was not what I expected them to be. And I
Yeah,
know you've
yeah.
probably gotten that just with the whole redneck moniker and everything else. But you compared the U.S. South to the global South, you make it so analogous. And I want to know why that is. Kind of enlighten the audience when it comes to that comment, and also based on the people's, I guess, justified doubts as far as like this ever happening, the reparations argument. Me personally, I've almost gotten exhausted from the reparations discussion, only because the infrastructure doesn't seem to have an interest in moving that proposal forward. Is not politically popular within the superstructure known as Congress at all right now. I mean, even I was just doing an episode about this when I talked about the Congressional Black Caucus, when a month after George Floyd was murdered, that less than 12% of white people supported reparations for Black people. And then you're talking about indigenous people too. Why just those two groups in particular? I understand I'm kind of playing devil's advocate, like why just those two particular groups of people, and how realistic is it? And would that have to occur outside of electoral politics based on the superstructure we have now?
Sure. Did you want to chime in, Jay, and then I can answer the question, or you want me to go?
I'll just say we don't have any disagreement on any of those programs. I think those are extremely important programs. I think that even though the Catholic Church has renounced the doctrine of discovery, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, of course, liberals laud, used it against land back reforms. That's the only thing I have to comment on. Used it against
So so one thing I got to say to begin with, most Latinos are indigenous. So they would be included in indigeneity and land reform. There's weird ways to work this kind of stuff out. But the reason is because Black people were subjected to enslavement and indigenous people were subjected to genocide. So that's why reparations are owed to them. And I got a buddy, Josh Inwood, who is at Penn State. He's a professor at Penn State. He wrote this great article about Lehman Brothers, and he traced Lehman Brothers' wealth to Montgomery and the slave trade. So what we should do, which should be fairly easy to do, is to look at these giant corporations and how they benefited from the slave trade, and how they built their wealth on the slave trade, and they should be the ones to pay reparations, not the U.S. government. Corporations, not the U.S. government, not our tax dollars. One of the reasons why I say the South is like the global South is because our culture is orientalized, which means it's denigrated. And our economies are set up to extract natural resources and cheap labor from our community. So to give you an example, timber is the most profitable industry in the state of Alabama. Our only billionaire, Jimmy Rain, is a timber baron. And 70% of Alabama is in timber. The land is in timber. And 62% of that land is absentee owned, a lot of it by hedge funds in Manhattan. So they're extracting our wealth. And the other big industry in Alabama, which is automotive, is some of the lowest paid automotive, relatively lowest paid automotive industries in the world. And they're attempting to unionize because of that right now. So clearly, like a global South country, our economy is set up so that transnational corporations can extract cheap labor and natural resources from our communities. And on top of that, our culture is talked about like it is the lowest piece of shit on the planet. It's orientalized, which is a strategy that global capital does to make exploiting us seem necessary. It's a civilized, like basically the argument is sort of implied that global capital is civilizing the state of Alabama or the rest of the South.
My only pushback would be the Latin comment, the Latino comment. I have serious issues with that observation. because I think that's a U.S. perspective, honestly. Like, I'm a Latin Americanist by trade, and
Sure.
the colonial caste system is the reason why. Most people that you call Latin wouldn't even consider themselves indigenous at all. They wouldn't even claim most of their indigenous ancestry anyway. Those people have pretty much been white throughout the whole colonial experience. The so-called mestizo, which is the whole the way they do it, like folklorically speaking, they almost romanticize it. The first encounter with the white European man and the indigenous woman, they almost make it like it's a romance novel. The noble savage, the noble indigenous person. But it's like after that experience, and we have this in the US too. I mean, this is an American experience, American being North America, South America, Central America, the Caribbean, with the intermixing, the miscegenation of people. This is not an uncommon thing, but the caste system was created on purpose to differentiate these groups, you know, based on the limpieza de sangre, the cleanliness of the blood, based on this idea of the one drop rule, basically. So, and even indigenous people were able to get exemptions for that particular rule based on the Spanish crown. That rule did not apply to Black people, but it did apply to indigenous people. So you automatically have, even within the structure of the colonial system itself, there's a distinction between indigenous people and Black people. And so people are automatically having two different mindsets coming into this experience, even though we're all thrown in together. It's not to say that indigenous people in Latin America were not enslaved. They were. Sometimes they were the enslavers. In the US, sometimes the people based on a different caste of Black, they enslaved other Blacks or people of a different caste. Mulattoes, for instance, mixed race people, Black and white, the products of Blacks and whites, were seen as a higher caste than Blacks like myself, for instance. But I guess the point being is that that system in itself is so indoctrinated in Latin America that that whole idea of Latin wouldn't even work. And then also you have the language issue. Well, what is Latin? What is Latino? I have Asian friends that are Latin, but they're not indigenous. They're East Asian. You can be Latin of any race. Latin doesn't have anything to do with race. It's simply, at that point, a cultural, ethnic, linguistic feature. It has nothing to do with race. But that would be my pushback, because I think when you add Latin people in this equation, it's complicated as it is, but that just adds a whole nother level of confusion, because you're basically equating people like a Marco Rubio. You're basically saying that Marco Rubio qualifies for reparations when he's a white Cuban dude, even though he may have a drop of Taino ancestry in the Caribbean. So that would be my pushback to that comment.
Sure, you clearly know more about it than I do.
Jay, you were going to say something?
I think it's, with our agricultural proletariat in the United States is half undocumented workers, right? And I think that if we look at the movements that are happening for land reform in Central America and South America, there's so much in common with these movements on a material basis, like on a need and on what's happening and who's doing what and who the enemy is. There's a lot of, and I think that we look at, like, for instance, the embargoes and sanctions on Venezuela, and then we look at the fact that there's like folks who've been here for 20 years who come from, like, Mexico, for instance, who haven't got nationalized or naturalized citizenship or whatever. But then Venezuelan folks are given, like, immediate, like, paths, right? And there's a reason for this, and we can see Biden is doing this, right? It's because they want to steal the productive forces of another country, take their jobs, fill their jobs up, putting in corporations where there weren't for small businesses. and from the U.S. the money goes back to the U.S. So Armenia, for instance, sent oil tanker to Venezuela, and we stole it and gave it to the Navy. Literally came in and intercepted it and gave it to U.S. oil execs in Texas. And so I think that when we see like the Alamo, the Texas, the Mexico was going to end slavery, and Texas didn't like that, and we can see that like California used to be named California. I mean, it's still named California. Well, at least it was named by English-speaking people. Like, there's all these things that tie into it, and I do agree. Portuguese people started the North Atlantic slave trade. I think that we can see that there is a non-essentialist character to this. Of course, you know what I mean. And I think that even I was surprised to hear this. I was reading Gerald Horne's book, and it said some people who are Black didn't have their right to vote taken away until the 1830s. And I was like, what? Like, 1960 was not the first time Black folks had to vote in the United States. And I did not know this until recently, right? So there's a whole lot of contradictions and exceptions and various things. I think that, but if we analyze and if we see what's been taken, and we can find the material relation between what happened and what was. But I do think it's going to take people who are from these areas, along with people who are super interested in analyzing these events, or to determine what needs to be done. And I think that, like Zac said, taking it from the corporations rather than taking it directly from tax dollars is going to do a lot more, because those tax dollars can go to help develop things now so that things don't happen like that again. You know what I mean? And instead they're being used for war and stuff like that. In the sense that we develop programs that benefit people, to educate people, to mental health, all these different programs that we could be using. And then the corporations who benefit off of these things give back the money. And then we're still benefiting the working class today, but we're also taking back some of the power. But how to get to that point, I think, is going to require a worker state in place to even accomplish it.
Yeah, I think it's going to have to be a worker centered focus. And I'm not saying that to be my biggest concern too with the reparations discussion. And I know people are going to make it seem like, well, Kiko, you just don't seem to be into it anymore. It's really discouraging that people are putting their eggs in a basket, thinking that. To me, the way reparations is being used is like it's a political football issue. And the fact that so many Black people, especially, are captured within one part of the ruling class over an issue like this, and they really believe it's almost like red meat. It's almost like conservatives thinking that their guns are going to be taken away, which is absolute bullshit. We know the guns are not going away. And it's like, Black people, are you really that gullible? You believe that these fuckers are going to give you reparations when most of them don't even support them? And like, how the fuck is that even used as a political tool at this point, when we've seen that there's no indication that they've taken reparations seriously, these so-called leaders? So why, but people are still so emotionally attached to the issue. That's what I mean. It's such an emotionally attached issue, and it's almost like people have been played, and that's what frustrates me the most. But I guess my biggest thing will be, how much further out can we allow this to happen before it becomes just ineffective completely? And I think Jay and I discussed this in a previous episode. Like, how much longer are we talking about? Our great grandkids? Like, is something going to happen by then, or is it just going to be the same discussion 75 years later? Like, that's my biggest concern about it.
So here's what I have to say. Here's what I think. First of all, if you were to get the so-called white working class on board with reparations, I think the conversation would change. Second of all, I don't care about land reform or reparations. I care about organizing the working class. That's the one thing that I care about more than anything. Besides my boy and my wife, the one thing I care about the most in life is organizing the working class. This political program is to organize the working class first and to get what we want second. Because if we get the working class organized, we're going to get a lot more shit besides land reform and reparations. We may never get land reform and reparations, but we're going to get some shit on the way to that. Mm-hmm. So the way I think about political programs, I think about them as organizing tools. I don't necessarily think we're going to get them. You know, everybody says, you'll never get that. You'll never get that. Well, maybe we won't get that, but we don't ever fucking know if we don't try. And there's a saying, it is, this guy, he was looking up and he needed to jump and catch a limb. And he was like, man, I just can't reach it. I can't reach it. And somebody came up and said, just jump as high as you can and try to catch that higher limb. So he bent down and he jumped up as high as he could and he missed the higher limb and he caught the lower limb on the way down. So that's kind of the way I think about political programs. Let's have a utopian political program. And once we get organized, see what other stuff we're actually going to get on the way to that utopia.
Yeah, I think that's that sloganeering, land, bread, and peace. You know, this is how you get people together. My dad, who's a staunch Republican and extremely regressive on a lot of issues, but you know, good-hearted dude. He's for reparations. He believes it's necessary. He believes it's necessary. Yeah, and so I think there is a popular. Here's the rub. There's a lot of things that are super popular. Healthcare, you know what I mean? There's a lot of things that are kind of left-leaning that are super popular, but even in those moments, unless, you know, when 90% of legislation is controlled by 1% of the population, then this is where I get a little bit worried about defeatism, right? Because when we see Black Lives Matter, but then we see black cops or black Democrats voting for Cop City, I can understand why people, if we're would get, you know, like, well, what can we do? But these when the crisis hits, spontaneous things happen, uprisings happen. They just, because people see it and they recognize it and they want to do something about it. We see this over and over again, but if there's not something to lead that in between and to make sure that those connections stay tight and to make sure there's some sort of material progress and to be able to move in that moment, historically, we've seen things happen where, for instance, in World War I, the German Social Democrats voted for the war in their own Congresses, but in the international, they promised they would vote against the war. But when they got in the moment and it was emotional and they had people whose maybe friends died, or that they didn't maintain their line, right? And developing a line and developing a program like Zach's talking about, developing something that gets the people to a point and then developing an organization around those points of belief and believing we can move forward, and then maintaining something that says we're not going to move away from these beliefs unless the majority of people in 5 years just really has a different take on it and we discuss it vigorously. You know, we're going to maintain what we said we were going to do. I think that's developing something that has a trust to people that they can say, oh, this is what. So because, for instance, in China, the communists weren't the most necessarily, not everybody was communist. It's just that they knew the communists had their back. You know what I mean? And they knew the nationals seemed a lot more like the Japanese political ideology than they felt comfortable with. You know, so I think this is I think we don't have to. I think one of the things that gives me a lot of optimism is we don't have to have everybody on board. We need to know what people want and need and really be part of that. But that once they see that we're on their side and we're trying to fight for them in those moments of crises when things pop off, and that we have the capacity and organizational, which we have to build, that's our primary focus, to build that organizational capacity of the working class. And once they see that we've done it, then that's when they start. Most people aren't going to be won over by talking points. They're going to be won over by seeing it work.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly.
And that's why capitalism is so hard to hide anti-communism or to hide communism.
We can, like, and that's the problem that I have on the left right now, is because we got Twitter personalities and, you know, Instagram personalities and all these people sort of talky, and we're not building the institutions necessary to carry all this ideological superstructure. We got to have the material base, and we need to be going out and just getting with working class people and asking them what they need and creating institutions based on that, and just see where it fucking goes. Just see where it goes. And if it goes towards land reform and reparations, great. But if it goes towards, you know, Christian ministry, that's great too. But you got to think that over the next 20 to 40 years, if we create a whole network of working class institutions, at some point in time, the people in those institutions are going to say, hey, shit is fucked up. We need to do something about it. And they're going to have the power to be able to do something about it because they've served the community for 25 to 40 years.
Zach, you hit it on the head there. As a matter of fact, our latest conversation with Matthew Whit, I believe is episode 118 with Professor Matthew Whit, based out of Laverne, California, the University of Laverne. He's a professor of public administration. We were just talking about the state of the left, the state of, not the state of the left, the state of independent media. And social media has become this force that has broken down organization. It's almost done the opposite, I think. There's a big danger of simply siloing and confirming biases. And I think people honestly been duped a lot. And I think there's too much money that's being incentivized. Me personally, I made the comment, if I get to a certain level, if I can make as much as I would have made as a professor, I'd be totally fine with just like giving the rest of it up. I'm not in this for money. Like, I created this forum in memoriam of my best friend. That's the reason why I created this. But I can't control what other people are doing with their platforms. But it seems like there's just so much of a, if you follow this person, you got to follow this person, you got to follow this person. But then it's almost like it's just a circle of the same bullshit, like over and over and over. And it's like, are you guys really trying to talk to different people though? Or are you just stuck in your little, like, your little zone or whatever? And that's the danger of it. I see this with the electoral politics stuff, and it's almost like an intolerance. That's the key word. There seems to be such an intolerance, and that's not acceptable. How the hell do you organize not being able to tolerate differences of opinion? Like, isn't that the point of organizing? Everything you all have said so far is we're not going to be on the same page about a lot of stuff, but that's not the point. That isn't the point. I totally agree with that statement. And that's the reason why I created this forum too, is not to be like a siloing where some people aren't going to like the stuff we talk about. But I believe there's stuff for everybody here. And maybe those people will come around to be like, okay, you know, I may not agree with you, but I understand you now. Just civil discourse. We don't even have that with this social media landscape now. And so that's going to automatically break down any sort of attempts to, this would be a great opportunity to organize people. I think social media has a great potential, even though they're billion-dollar companies. Because right now, that's what we have to work with. We have to work it within the structure that we have. But instead of people doing that, they're being incentivized to keep the structure alive. They're not incentivizing this commonality. They're doing the exact opposite. It's all about making the revenue streams alive. But like you said, we just had this discussion. But that's what we want to do here, is to organize. This will be our version of organizing, but just on the social media platform. Of course, you have to do it outside of this too. But the fact that people aren't even doing that outside of social media is that's concerning. And then the people who are on the ground but they do completely different shit on social media. It's like, what kind of message are you sending to people doing that kind of stuff?
There's a great article by Brian Becker about use of social media and stuff like that. And I know Zach wants to say something, but the only other thing I had to respond to that, I'll go ahead and wait. I kind of actually, my dog's bark right now. I'm gonna let Zach say what he's got.
I just think you gotta, for better or worse, you gotta have some kind of media game at this point in time, for better or worse. And I try to be as authentic on social media as I possibly can. It is what it is right now. And yeah, there's people on there making millions of dollars by just talking in an echo chamber. And it's frustrating because I think that there are people out there with really good ideas who can't get that kind of following. But yeah, you got to have it. You got to have the social media game. You got to have the media game, or you're not serious about it. That's the way I feel.
So I agree with you 100%. I think that it's a necessity of the day. It is, we live in this, we have to work with it. I think Carlos Garrido's book, to speak to your question, is a really great, The Purity Fetish, which I know you've had Carlos on. I think that's a great book to look at. To how do we stop, seeing other working class people as our enemies, and how do we not cede ground to the far right? How do we not cede ground to the bigots, to the capitalists, to all of these notions, to all of these capitalist formations, to all of these things? How do we do that? And I think it's a really good book of like analyzing the crisis of Western Marxism and the ideas of the idea that everything has to be perfect. Otherwise, it's not, because when we think about it like that, and this kind of like everything has to be perfect, we really get burnt out pretty easily, because there were everybody who was fighting in World War I immediately turned and started fighting against Russia immediately, and they had a civil war going on. These are not the ideal circumstances to build anything, you know what I mean? But they still built a lot. And so I think the moment they have the revolution, there's going to be decisions we have to make that aren't going to be like, do you want the thing everybody wants, or do you want to do the thing nobody likes? It's going to be like, do you want to do this thing that you're being kind of, what are we going to do about this, and this? It's more of a, you have to be engaging with what is. And I think that's a large part of the issue with how we've been kind of taught to think, is that we're taught to think that we should really focus on our disagreements more than focus on the rational kernels of truth, because I think that we think that some of these the ideas are what move things, but this is a bourgeois ideology, because only someone who can tell other people what to do thinks their ideas actually move things. It's labor that moves things. Now, ideas are super important, and we have to be able to analyze and understand and know what's going on and all this kind of stuff. And that's a form of labor in and of itself. But until those ideas are put into action, they don't. And if we continue to have ideas that don't have any sort of place in the material capacity of being able to be developed and stuff like that, then of course we'll get burnt out. Like we would never. And if we never have examples of how those things have worked historically, and we don't see anything, then of course we're going to have nihilism almost. A sense of this can't even work. And so I think the Breakthrough News is a wonderful geopolitical economic forum. There are some really good social media outlets that put out really good, consistent stuff. I think that the issue is that outside of certain outliers that are really, really, really good, there's a lot of the issue isn't even if the content is good or bad. The issue is, to me, that it's like, right now, the ship is the establishment. Let's say like the neoliberalism, whatever, what the ship is, the superstructure, right? All right. And we need another ship, because everybody else is just on flotsam and jetsam and like, barely hanging on by what's the word? Those buoys or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And like lifesavers or whatever. And so like we and I think these social media a lot of these folks, whether they're good content or bad content, whether they're useful or not useful, it's that they're just flotsam and jetsam at this moment, and they're not actually like a thing that's capable of doing anything. And I think that really powerfully, Claudia and Karina got 27% of the free and equal debates. They won with 27%. The next wasn't even there. Cornel West got 8%. So that's and Gloria LaRiva got the most votes since Eugene Debs running with Leonard Peltier. And I think it's for a socialist. I think that this is powerful proof of organizational capacity, to say the very least. And I know that other organizations are also very well organized. And so I think that it just takes a while for even when we do win in things, it takes a while for that to get into the social consciousness that we can. Like, it takes a while for people to realize that this thing even happened, because it's going to be hidden. It's going to be talked against. It's going to be done whatever. It's not. And so this is why the media focuses on our spontaneous and sporadic actions, so that to a certain extent they can demonize it, but also so they can kind of have it like, well, you saw that didn't affect anything. You know what I mean? You can see it and then think that it won't affect anything, but really it did affect things. You just don't. They're not going to put the camera on what it affected in a positive way, because if it does affect something in a positive way, they're going to spin it like they did. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't the movement. It was Obama didn't halt. Like Obama says he hauled the pipeline, but it was the people at Standing Rock and all these people who stood up for years and hauled the pipeline. It was people who fought for gay rights for years and years that got gay marriage to be legal. It's fought people, and this is the obfuscation and the appeasement, the assimilation of the working people's ideas and struggles into the liberal thing that was fighting against it up until the point where they couldn't fight against it anymore, and then they act like they were fighting for it the whole time.
I love this analysis in the sense that you have a movement who says they want certain things, they get part of it, the establishment says they did it, right? Like that's the basic structure of it. To me, that analysis leads to a solution, which is that we've got to be continually creating new social forms, new ideas, new ways of working, new organizations, new institutions. We've got to, like, as fast as possible, be creating new ones, because that's going to happen. We can sit here and talk all day about revolutions and that sort of stuff, but the fact of the matter is that the United States is the most powerful empire in the history of the world. And we're probably not going to overthrow it. And even if we did, we would have to use many of the structures that the United States already has existing to govern. So sometimes revolutions make things worse. We got to, say that too. So, but what's realistically, our revolutionary fervor and our revolutionary language is going to get co-opted by the establishment, and they're going to give us a certain amount of reforms to shut us up. So the solution to that is to keep more demands, more social structures, more organizations, more institutions, more social forms, more different language, and to quicken that as much as possible to where the state just can't keep up.
And I think that, we did lose in Vietnam. We did lose essentially in Iraq. Now, of course, in the process, we did. There was 2 million lives. There was all throughout his. You've seen in Indonesia, we killed 1 million communists, and they hadn't even done anything. They hadn't even done anything at all. We also have used, I would say, like CIA assets that were considered pro-communist, that never even read, didn't even understand Marx, like Pol Pot, for instance. And of course, the communists had to take them out. The North Vietnamese, and we were, and so I think that there is the use of, figures who have a short historic memory or don't have a certain kind of class character. Once they've gotten into power, and all of these different things have happened with the Cold War, and we can look at Gorbachev or even Khrushchev after with his speech, his secret speech. Like, there's these things where things will happen even within what could be a positive thing, where if you have 20 million people die, 27 million people die, who are your most ardent and ideologically like down people, and then they have a whole people who just forget and kind of see and don't realize what they're fighting for and stuff like that. There's going to be a period of historical nihilism, potentially, sadly, because if you don't continue to ingrain certain. And so when you say, I think that Robert Owens, for instance, believed that we could, develop small communes, and these would. They would have like women's rights. They would have like childcare. They'd have really powerful stuff especially for the 1800s. And they were really. He believed that this could be eventually socialism. That this could eventually spring out into socialism. And of course they did. I think the first natural thing people do in a crisis, and the right thing to do, the correct thing to do. I mean, not even right or correct. It's just natural. Is to go and share and to go invite other people and to go and go. Hey, what are we going to do to develop this together? That's like so natural. But if that alone worked, then we would have already been there. And so I think that to know that they fight so hard against it, and that Oppenheimer was a neutral movie to communists at the very least. You know what I mean? It was neutral. I think that this is major. Like, this is major. Like, I think there are major things happening where more and more people. I don't think that if anyone would put on a bingo card, Tucker Carlson praising Soviet architecture in 2024, like I think there's so many weird things happening that I don't think it's. Even Lenin in 1917 thought that there would be a revolution in his life. Or 1916, he thought there would be a revolution in his life. I think that having seen, I think we are more likely to, if we organize. And we have the capacity, we build the capacity, we have a more opportunity to win a revolution in the United States than we do to win the lottery, for instance. And so I think that everybody's playing lottery. So I think what I'm saying is that 50% of the military already voted for Bernie. They're already, or Ron Paul. They're already against the establishment, right, to a certain extent, or some variation of it. I think that half of them would probably join up with us. I think that there's a lot of people who would but here's the thing: general strike has to happen. Any a general strike would be, and Sean Fain's calling for that. We're entering into a world war period. There's a lot of things change in these moments, and I think that we just, if we have an organized group, and I think PSL is like that. I think that there's other groups that are really doing good work, but I like PSL because that's why I joined them. But I think that that there are these groups that historically, if we organize like folks did, but with our own characteristics, with our own national understanding, that there is a capacity. Because here's the thing: when the crisis happens, fascism has never been a grassroots movement. It's always funded by the industrialists, by DuPont, by IBM, by all these different groups to create a national interest, to make the working class think that they share something in common with the bourgeoisie more than they do the other working class people, right? And so I think that we need to understand that even if we do and are able to develop it, which I think we can, and we have, and historically develop something that can that people are yearning for right now, and show them something that they can actually achieve it, and show them historically they can. I think even then we have to face off against the reaction to that. And I think that in that moment, if it's only been a series of projects all across, I don't know if we can defend in that moment. But so I do agree with you that we wouldn't be able to win. But if it is something that is developed and has an organizational capacity on a national level that can keep all that can help make movements on a dime kind of thing, with democratic centralism would be what I would think would need to happen there. Then I think we can win if we're strategic and if we but I think that's only if we build what is necessary.
You have any response to this?
I don't see it. That's it. You know, basically what I want my revolution is for the working class to do for themselves. That's it. It's real simple. I don't think we can fight the empire. I think the empire will crumble under its own weight and under its own internal contradictions. And I think it can be pushed to that. But I think what's left afterwards is a lot of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that being the sort of left-wing prepper that I am, like, I think figuring out how to help the working class do for themselves and provide for themselves, whether it be auto repair or farming or whatever, is the revolution, because that's what's going to allow us to survive when global society collapses. As far as a front-facing attack on, they're just going to crush us. Like, they can cook up whatever they want to cook up. Jay, they'll probably have you with some sort of AI created pedophilia that they're like sharing with people, you know, like there's nothing that they can do. There's nothing that they won't do to discredit people and to take. There's no limits to their mendacity. Let me put it that way. The empire, there is no limits to the mendacity of the empire. And for me, I just want the working class to be separated from that. And we have this argument from Black nationalisms to separate from white people. And I sort of have the same sort of instinct, which is I just want working class people to be able to separate from the empire.
I think the black belt thesis, you know, is an important historical movement to look into. And I don't, as a white person, I don't really have. I think that's, you know what I mean. I think that is a discussion for black folks to have about whether or not. I mean, because about how that's going to go about. You know what I mean. That's not really my. But as far as the empire being so strong that it would be able to do, you know, any individual person, certainly 100% stronger than us. I agree with you that it would have to be a point of crisis, right? It's not just going to happen because in this moment, like in this moment with the current superstructure, with the current situation. But I just think that situation is changing so much, so rapidly right now that it wouldn't necessarily just be us versus the imperialists. And I think that we would have, I think there would come a time when there is like global hegemony is cracking under multipolarity and BRICS and whatnot. And I think that I think that we have to just look at this historical situation. We have to look and see what's happening and wait for an opening. And I think there will be an opening. We have to be super organized for it. Like we can't just wait for it. We have to like develop these programs like you're talking about in the interim of that period. And so we're on the same page. Like we need to do the exact thing you're talking about. But I guess what I mean is that I really believe that if we do that, and if we have a strong organization that has democratic centralism, that when that moment arises of the crumbling and stuff like that, we'll be able to avert that chaos. Because we're already in chaos of the markets. We're already in the chaos of whatever makes profit. You know what I mean? There's a great book called The People's Republic of Walmart that if you haven't checked it out.
Oh, wow.
It's by socialists. They basically that like Amazon and Walmart, the way that they organize their actual like production and the way that they're able to move things and stuff like that. If we did that on a societal basis, then we're looking at like a Linde, looking at like these kinds of programs that like could meet people's needs right now, and that they already kind of exist, but just in a market form.
I was wanting to make a transition. I wanted to, if y'all are good with another hour, I'm good with that. We'll see how it goes, because it's like, oh, let's squeeze this out as much as possible, because I know I got places to go, but this is too fun of a conversation. It's too interesting, too informative to, not allow some extra time in there. And this is greatly appreciated. I know this has already been a wonderful episode 121, but Zac made the proposal at first that we think about May Day for a second. I'll be 100% honest with you. I didn't really think about it that much before you brought it up. It was in the back of my mind. Events were in the back of my mind around the labor movements, but actual May Day, and I'll tell you something. I think a lot of it is just indoctrination from when you're smaller. You think of all these different like holidays, and we have Labor Day that seems to be emphasized way more, like May Day way less emphasized. And May Day also has different meanings. May Day is also the beginning of spring, or the summer, the transition period. And then you have a lot of the pagan influences when we talk about May and the solstices and the equinoxes. But we're talking about more on the labor context. And I'm just curious, how would you describe that to somebody? What does May Day mean to you, Zach, in particular? And just to the audience, just so they can have an understanding of what that means in the bigger picture.
You're gonna have to help me on this, Jay. May Day is the celebration of the Haymarket affair, right? Is that correct? And Albert Parsons and others were resisting the bosses in Chicago, and they were hung for this on Haymarket Square, if I'm not mistaken, on May 1st. And it became a symbol of working class resistance all over the world. The Haymarket Affair did. It became a symbol of working class resistance all over the world. What people don't really know about Albert Parsons is that he lived in Alabama for a significant amount of time. He may have been from Alabama originally. So Albert Parsons, so that's May Day, and it's all over the world. It is the international day to celebrate working class resistance. And the American version of this, which is Labor Day, which is in September, early September, was specifically created to contradict the communist underpinnings of May Day, which is May 1st. So tomorrow. So for me, May Day is a day that I just remember that I'm a worker, and that I'm not here without all of the work that's ever been done in human history by every human being that's ever lived. Because work is a human universal. Some people don't like it when I say that because they associate work with capitalism. I don't. My shirt says redefine work. I don't associate work with capitalism. I associate work with doing for your community and doing for your family. And I think that's what work has meant for most of human history. And some people say, well, labor and work are different. I don't make a distinction. I think work and labor are the same thing. I don't think we need to parse out these semantic debates. Work is work. And I'm proud of the work I do. I'm proud of changing my boy's diaper, which is work. I'm proud of giving my boy a bottle, which is work. And I'm also proud of the more traditionally male work that I do, such as lifting heavy stuff for, moving stuff into the house, working on cars, cutting grass, hanging stuff up. I think all forms of work are worth celebrating. And in our society, we did not, and this is something I've learned since I've been in the hospital, which is that traditionally women's work is different. It's more communal, and it's more about sharing, and it's not celebrated by our society, and it needs to be celebrated more by our society, because without women and infants, there is no society. So we need to celebrate their work too.
And congratulations to you and your wife being welcoming your child into the world. I was really proud. We talked about it some on episode 89. That was really cool. I've seen a lot of your statuses around this issue of staying at home. So I'm really happy for you, and I think it's going to be a great. You're going to learn so much about yourself, and it seems like you've already learned a lot about yourself just in this brief
Already have.
period of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I got to be a stay-at-home dad for a while too, look, I'm excited about the powerful journey you're about to and have started to engage with, and it's wonderful and it's beautiful, and you're 100% right about women's labor, International Women's Day, Working Women's Day, and May Day, International Workers' Day, were both started, like you said, in the United States. But are celebrated much more so internationally, interestingly enough. In 1921, I'm sorry, May Day was changed by the U.S. government to be called Loyalty Day. This was a period in time, the first Red Scare, when if you were a union leader, if you were a communist, if you were leaning, if you were, if you believed in the Russian Revolution, if you did any of those things, you could be tried in the Sedition Act and put to death. You couldn't even criticize your government. There was a law in 1921 that you could not criticize the government in a certain way. The Loyalty Day became the anti-communist holiday that was supposed to replace May Day. It's not very popular. And then again, like you said, Labor Day I think I might be wrong about this, but I think it was late. I think it was like Reagan when Labor Day became a thing, if I'm not mistaken. You can probably understand why. I think that May Day is like you said, it's a pagan holiday initially beforehand that represented spring, but I think that this is symbolic of the next step in evolution, the next step in our production from primitive accumulation to primitive communism, whatever you want to call it, early communism, whatever you want to call it, the early stages to agriculture, which developed patriarchy, which developed we eventually made mercantilism, and then feudalism, and then capitalism, and then now we're entering that new stage, that new spring, that new when everything is born again, whatever you do, all these wonderful imageries from all throughout history of the belief that things can change, the belief that the people who build things, the people who make things, the people who have built every single thing we see deserve to have ownership over the things that they build, and to be able to, and that belief, it's not peculiar even to the founding of some of the ideals that led to the French and American Revolution. Now, those things were certainly countered and deviated and variated by money and interest, certainly. But if it wasn't for those ideals of free labor, of these kinds of things, if it wasn't for those ideals, we wouldn't have reached the stage of development where people were brought. We can see this as a step in a direction where the productive forces of the world become unleashed, and we can now. And so I think that's where focusing and centering the worker today, especially, but all year long. This needs to be more of a holiday. We need to really. I mean, in a lot of places they celebrate. I remember when I was in like elementary school, somebody saying that their sister was going to a May Day celebration, and I thought that it was like flowers and like people in white dresses, and you know what I mean. But no, they were talking about going to a demonstration. So I think the more and more people realize like themselves as a worker and start identifying themselves as a worker, and they'll start to they'll start to look at politics as about their interests as a class, as opposed to red versus blue. And I think that's one of the most significant parts of May Day is realigning every year that we're workers.
I tell you something that stood out to me when Zach was talking about, and that was wonderful, Jay. I like how you included what I was kind of getting at earlier with the double meaning of May Day And I like that whole idea of rebirth that analogy that you just made. But Zach was talking about the idea of work, and I get the comments when people say, when I say I'm doing an interview, yes, I got an interview, they're automatically assuming that I'm going in applying for a job. When I say I'm doing an interview, they don't understand that I'm the one that's doing the interviewing. And also, to me, this is, I don't even see this as work, what I'm doing right now. This is something, this is like a passion. This is like me teaching. I mean, it is work, but it's like I'm teaching in the classroom. It's no different than teaching in the classroom. Like, this is my version of that. Is I didn't even realize that's what it was until a guest said, "That's what you're doing. You're a professor right now. You don't realize that's what you're doing right now, right?" And I actually I went to a coffee shop a couple of months ago, and someone said, "Well, you're teaching now. You know, you're just not in the school." I was like, I didn't even look at it that way, because it's just like, it doesn't feel like work. But I think it's a great way to put it. Like, work is what you make it. Like, it is work, but it doesn't have to have this connotation that we associate with work. Like, it can be something that's very fulfilling. And I think we need to take more pride into our work. And I've had to learn that too. I mean, shit. I told people, and it's funny you mentioned Walmart, Jay, because I work at Walmart currently right now. I work at night at Walmart with my mom, because my mom was like, you know what? I'm about to retire soon. My dad just retired about 3 years ago. And so she was like, I honestly need some help right now. I was like, well, shit, I'll be 100% with you. Outside of academia, that was my favorite job. When I worked there like 19 years prior, when I was going to get my master's degree at Middle Tennessee State University, I would leave night classes and go straight to work. I used to work on the remodel crew. And after that, they were like, this guy, man, he kicks ass or whatever. Let's just hire him on full time, and he can, work, put up the freight and stuff at night, overnight, stocking. And so that's what I did like 19 years ago. It was honestly my favorite job outside of teaching. And now I'm doing it again 19 years later. But it's what you make of it. Like, it's fun going into work, because it's more just like an attitude. Some of the same people that I worked with back then are still there. A lot older, but they're still there, and they remember me. But it's just simply is what you make it. And we got to worry less about the perceptions. But people will get it, and you start to doubt yourself too. Not me, more so, because I kind of thought, once I was leaving academia, that it was hard for me to say that this may not be what was meant for me to be. And maybe I can teach in another capacity. But I never would say, I can't say that I thought that I would be at Walmart now, but it's okay. Because people ask, like, are you okay with that? I'm like, what the fuck do you mean? Like, it is what it is. Like, I am okay with it. Like, that's the situation. And I get to work with my mom, which is super cool. I mean, she's not watching this interview. She doesn't watch most of the interviews, which I wouldn't care anyway. But I'll say that she gets on my nerves a lot at work, but she appreciates my work there when I'm there. It's fun being able to work with my mom or whatever. It's so weird, but it's fun at the same time, because my mom is a character. You hear me, man? Like, she's a fucking character. Just the cursing, and she would say anything at all. And so there's this surprise factor at work. You don't know what you're getting into, but shit, that's exciting to me. I mean, every night is different. You never know what you're going to get into, but that's my mom for you.
Yeah, we have a similar story. I was an auto technician for 7 years before I went to college. My PhD didn't pan out. I went back to work as a auto technician, and honestly, I had more fun the second time as being an auto technician than I have had doing anything else. Because it was just like, I had been involved in politics. We had gotten a mayor elected. Like, there are a bunch of people that had done a bunch of mean ass shit to me. Like, and I went and I was just like appreciated for being there, and like just did my job and went home. And it was just simple.
Mm-hmm.
And like to a degree, it was way better than being in academia or activism at all, because I was more appreciated by capitalists than I was by other activists. And you're just like, why is it like that? Why, like that? We're on the same side. We're fighting for the same thing, and people just saw me as a way to get what they wanted when I was in activism, and when I was in and when I went back to work in the shop, I guess people saw me as a way to get what I wanted, but at least they treated me nicely about it, you know. And they get, like, I didn't make anything for my work in activism, I was making $30,000-$40,000 a year working turning wrenches. So I had a different appreciation for what work was and what work is the second time around than I did the first time around.
I just started as a pipe fitter with a union here locally, and there's a use value. People used to make a shirt because they wanted to wear a shirt, or somebody else needed in their group needed to be not cold, needed something to wear. The use of it, right? And then eventually there'd be other people and they'd be like, oh, well, I can exchange this for something we don't have as much of. You know what I mean? And like, this is the beginning of, there's a use value in this. I hope, I hope a lot of people gain a lot of use. I have personally already. In your shows, for sure, I've gained a bunch of use value, so I hope that people do donate to your show if they are able to, so you can have an exchange value in it as well. But there's another kind of exchange beyond just monetary. There's the exchange of ideas. There's the exchange of all of these things that can be used beneficially. Work is like Zach was saying, it's so broad of a category. I think that, I'm learning how to move liquids and gases from one place to another by taking resources that were originally natural resources that become raw material through labor, that have become pipes through a factory in Malaysia, that come to us, and then we fix them in various ways. We fashion them in various ways from there to fit together to get you flooring from a factory, or to get you this or that. These processes. And in the same way, the natural resource of history is then extracted and its raw material into words and understanding through newspapers and through the media and through word of mouth and through all these different forms, and then take in direct knowledge and secondary knowledge and all these things. And then from there, it's fashioned into an understanding of an analysis of the world around us, and an understanding of different ideological and concerns. And then we use that to, like Karl Marx says, not just understand the world, but to change it. And I think that that's another form of work. And I think that the sad aspect is that, like you said, with activist communities, we live under a world that has traumatized us, a system that we will never in our lifetimes not have been traumatized by, right? If we were living under a socialist, let's say GDR, or let's say Vietnam or whatever, we would have a different series of events that spawned our engagement. And of course we still have trauma. Of course we still have negative times. Of course we still have all these things. However, we would have different ways of dealing with them. We would be different people. We would be living differently. And so I think that when we look at activist circles now, we're dealing with people who are under the traumas of capitalism, and they are under a lot of the false consciousness thereof, even as they try to change it. And they are a product of the system, and they're trying to create a system that they will never be products of. That only their children or their great grandchildren may become products of. And I think that in that sense, you have a lot of people for so many different reasons who are ready to see anybody else who is engaging with the same kind of work as competition in some way, somehow or another, as somebody who is not, we don't see each other as fellow like collaborators. It's like we see each other as that person stealing my idea. I don't understand a lot of the way people engage with activism, sadly. But a lot of it seems as if it's somehow trying to emulate something other than a workers' social movement, and more so trying to. It seems it has more akin to high school drama, akin to celebrity gossip rags, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know if this comes from like some sort of belief in the idea that like, I don't know. I think it has to do with great man theory to a certain extent, that somehow if you're an organizer, you're trying to become Elon Musk of organizing, and everybody's trying, you know what I mean? Like, and if we don't cut you down a notch, you're going to have undue influence or whatever, in a way that I don't understand all the ways in which we hurt each other. That's why I started studying psychoanalysis, and I realized a lot of these things, just in the same way that if we don't analyze the structure of things that are existing historically, we're not going to quite be aware. We're going to make mistakes in ways that we don't have to. And in the same way, if we don't do that to the way that we develop as people on a psychoanalytical basis, then there's going to be a whole lot of stuff that happens to us that we have no idea what's happening. And I would like to, I like Lacan's pretty good, but I'd like to see a psychoanalysis of the left. And I think Carlos Credo does a pretty good job of this in Purity Fetish, but Daniel Tutt does a good job of this in his book, How to Read Like a Parasite, saying the undue Nietzschean influence. There's a lot of things to discuss. And I'm sorry that you're such a good activist, man. And I'm sorry that people were mean to you.
Yeah,
it's something that you said, Jay, and this goes into this is a perfect segue into I thought about somebody as soon as you made that last comment, Jay. Christian Smalls. Chris Smalls, part of the Amazon Labor Union.
He looks like a wrestler when you see him now.
Was that?
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but he looks like a wrestler when you see him. The way he's dressed and like the glasses and stuff, he looks like a fucking wrestler. It's like, what the hell happened to this dude?
But see, a lot of what Jay was saying, even with these, like I said, I've interviewed a lot of people. You all follow the channel. And some of these people have egos. I mean, I have an ego. Everyone has an ego, but sometimes it just like it stands out a little bit too much for, like, if you're trying to organize and you're trying to do things, there's just too much going on with some people. Like, I'll just leave it at that. But I have something, I don't like to be, I'm a skeptic naturally, but something just doesn't quite add up with this Chris Small stuff. I've seen other people comment about it because apparently there's another person that may be taking charge. There's a lady, I think she's Dominican. She's based out of New York, from what people were saying. I don't know how true this is, but I'm just going by what people are saying. And Chris Smalls may be pivoting into something completely different. I'm not sure of that, but that's what people are saying on the ground. What is your perception of Chris Smalls and Sean Fain that was already mentioned before? Like, I'm just curious, Zach's thoughts of those two people and Jay as well.
Well, I don't know anything about Chris Small, but I like Sean Fain. I like Sean Fain a lot. The fact that he's turned UAW into a more militant union, and that they're coming into the South. They got the leaders of the fucking South, I call them the colonial administrators of the South, because they're just managing the South on behalf of transnational corporations.
Mm-hmm.
And he got them shaking in their fucking shoes, man. They are scared to death of Sean Fain and the UAW. And I fucking love it. I love it. Like, it makes me so happy to see them put their crap out about UAW and like UAW doesn't deliver on promises and all this kind of stuff. And like the workers are still going to vote for UAW anyway. And I love it because my only criticism of unions, is unions need to focus on the larger society more and not as much on just the union.
100%.
Because what the colonial administrators of Alabama and other states are saying is that, well, the auto manufacturers are going to move. They're right. Eventually, the union will force the auto manufacturers to move because it will no longer be profitable to, and Alabama's competitive advantage in transnational capitalism is cheap labor. Eventually, they will move, just like they moved out of Detroit. Like they will eventually move. UAW and other unions need to focus more on building wraparound working class institutions so that when Mercedes and Hyundai do move in 50 years, the working class with the wealth they've captured from these transnational corporations can have their own society in Alabama and other places that they control. And that's my only criticism. I love Sean Fain. I love the union. I'm friends with the Valley Labor Report guys who are a union talk show out of Huntsville. I love those guys. I love the union movement. I'm so totally on board with it. And I love the fact that they're scaring the shit out of these colonial administrators. It makes me happy as hell.
Yeah, I shout out to Justine Medina, who is also with the ALU, Amazon Labor Union. I also am not familiar enough with Chris Smalls, other than him being influential in helping form the Amazon Labor Union, and him going to Cuba recently to talk with Communist Party members there. And as far as Sean Fain goes, he's absolutely refreshing. When the communists were kicked, he shared the Troublemaker's Guide, saying that was like one of his inspirations. When the communists were kicked out, when the Taft-Hartley Act happened, when all of these things that made it to where workers or unions leadership was, I think the thing that Zach's referring to, wherein unions became insulated, was certainly a byproduct of this, of the Red Scare, of the McCarthyism, et cetera, et cetera. I think that, and the pre-McCarthyism, 1934, and this is this type of Red Scare, the now with the development that we've been able to see since, we can point to Occupy, we can point to the anti-globalization rallies of the 90s and 2000s. We can point to a lot of things here in the more modern, recent terms that kind of started that push and slow process, but to the point where now we're having more strike movements than ever before. We don't have the highest union representation, labor engagement, but we have more militant, which is really, really powerful movement. And I think that with Volkswagen, like here in Chattanooga, that's just now won by 72%. With all these really powerful things, we're seeing something that is that can really change the framework. I love that Sean Fain called for a ceasefire. I love that that we're able to. That he's calling for a general strike. That he's going after Tesla next. That he's win after win, momentum building. He's so smart and strategic in how he does it. And I think that this strategic, tactical, militant, radical engagement and is exactly what we need. I think that hopefully more and more unions will see this and realize that that's what the workers want. That's what the workers have always wanted, but they just didn't. But they just wouldn't listen to them, or they wouldn't, or they were under false consciousness to a certain point. The interesting thing is within my union, I talked to some folks, and a lot of folks joined because there was an apprenticeship program they could engage with, and they didn't really know about unions. Like, they didn't know about tactics, they didn't know about slows, and they didn't know about all these different things that are used. They don't know about labor history. Although there is a labor history part to the apprenticeship program, folks aren't necessarily aware. In some places, some people are very aware, but even people who are part of unions aren't quite aware that of the power that they hold, so close. That, and this is the same with any institution, no matter how powerful it is, no matter how awesome its potential. If it doesn't realize its potential, if it doesn't know, it can take it for granted. And then and taking those things for granted, they cede that territory to the right. So you have these anti-communist unions that can come into power, or anti-worker unions, essentially, there's a militant worker union, and then this other union. I mean, we see this with like this could be, they could be using racism, they can be using whatever to divide the working class, but they do this within the union movement itself too, or they did back in the day especially. They would divide the railroad conductors from the railroad track layers. They would try to divide their interests, and I think that right now, like I was saying earlier, there's a special recipe that's happening right now where, in order to critique one side, in order to critique the other side, has to say things that really critique the superstructure, but they have to fool their people into thinking that only one side is guilty of it. You know what I mean? And this is becoming, like very, it's interesting, because then you'll have people saying things like being against the Ukraine, being against funding Ukraine war, right? Against funding Ukraine, and on both sides. And this is like Zach was talking about earlier. There was that populist movement that formed up with Black folks, post Reconstruction, that helped.
And that was union based. That was union based.
What's that?
That was union based.
Yeah, exactly.
Union based.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's the stuff, the kind of stuff we can and will start to see. Like Zach said, as long as unions start to take more. But the thing is, with Taft-Hartley, you're not allowed to make a political move. Like, you're not allowed to use strikes as a political tool. Essentially, you can only use it as. But with a general strike, where everybody negotiates their contracts at the same time, it's not considered a solidarity strike. That's one way around it, kind of. I think there's other ways around these laws, and I think, though, that there's going to have to be a secondary movement that happens alongside of these things to really demand the leverage that we need to make the union movement more than just trade unionism or communism, but actually into a revolutionary force.
I have a comment about the UAW just as a whole. It is absolutely refreshing. I want to read this headline, and I'm sure we would talk about this headline. Volkswagen workers in Tennessee vote for union, a labor milestone. The Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga is said to become the first unionized auto factory in the South, not owned by one of Detroit's big three. I know you all know about that news, and Jay also referred to Tesla. There's a lot of activity going on in Sweden right now with the Tesla workers. And so there's going to be probably even more development by the summer, maybe even sooner than that. So there's a lot of labor activity going on now. You mentioned the general strike. We've talked about that several times in previous episodes. The whole idea of a general strike in the U.S. My question isn't really Sean Fain. We know about Sean Fain, UAW. My biggest thing is this, though. Why are the biggest unions still affiliated with one side of the ruling class? Why not endorse somebody else? Why endorse Joe Biden and the Democratic Party if you're a labor-based movement? Why not support? There's plenty of people to support that, to me, would share your vision and the interest. So that's where my skepticism comes in. It doesn't make any sense. Why would UAW endorse a fucking corporate party, basically? and when they really don't have to put the work in and all they simply get the benefit of the doubt, like, okay, we're going to endorse the Democrats again?
That's a good question. That is a really good question. I mean, Biden's NLRB has been favorable to unions, to be fair. More so than conservatives, but at the same time, it's still it's like you're saying, it's still a corporate party, and it seems like they could throw their weight behind, you know, they could use it as a threat to get more concessions, which is like what Jay was talking about with a political strike. Well, you wouldn't necessarily have to get a political strike. You could just throw your endorsement around to get concessions. So you're not going to endorse anybody, or you're going to endorse, you know, Cornel West or Robert Kennedy or whatever. And, you know, Robert Kennedy is real pro-labor. Like, he comes from a family that's pro-labor. So, yeah, I think that's a real good question. I don't really know the answer to it, but I think it's something to watch for sure.
I would have to say that, you know, I don't know of what discussions were had between Biden and Sean Fain. I don't know what was said. You know what I mean? I don't know what did Biden promise to sign the PRO Act? Did he, you know, say, hey, we're doing better with NLRB than we are? I mean, we know that Biden has like stopped railroad workers strike. We know that, you know, we know that he has been both. There have been things that are better with labor, and there are things he's done that are not good. I think that if I had to wager a guess, I would just say he's hedging his bets in a certain direction that would probably be maybe more favorable. But I agree with you that the better tactic, but again, I don't have direct knowledge of exactly all the different things. You know what I mean? The better tactic would be to say, no, you don't have a monopoly on our vote. No, we're not gonna. You know, we want to hold you accountable. You know, if you really want our vote, you got to earn it. If you don't, you know, I think that as somebody who is going to be voting for a third party in a red state, I look at more like what is going to happen if this and what is going to happen if that. And I don't really take a preferential treatment on one side or the other because I'm not an accelerationist, nor am I, you know, do I want to believe that the Democratic Party has some sort of monopoly on my vote, or do I want to think that they are going to do anything for me and like that? But I just look at, okay, if Biden wins, there's probably going to be a violent reaction from Trump's base. Then when that goes back to normal, people are like, phew, thank goodness everything's normal. And then it won't be normal. We'll just be doing imperialism like we have been, and things won't get any better because they'll be like, well, we won, so we didn't have to do anything. And that's not great. And the other side, if Trump wins, then we have this, you know, chaotic engagement that we don't know exactly what's going to happen because he's both establishment and he also does things sometimes that just like are loose cannon-esque. So we don't exactly know, but we know that the left, both liberal and actual left, will stand up and go, okay, we're going to do something about this, right? And that in that moment, the Democrats will realize they didn't do enough for the people, and that they would have to do something else next time. So I don't want to say any one of these is preferential. These are what's going to happen, inevitably. So I don't know if that answers the question of like why he would choose one or the other. I know CPUSA has also endorsed Biden. I don't exactly understand, other than it is a very contentious argument of, is Trump, by his rhetoric and by his engagement and who he surrounds himself with, more dangerous than Biden? And I think this is a debate that has merit, but you know, I come on the side of I'm not going to in any way give any more of my energy and time or reward the Democratic Party for their inaction on things such as Roe versus Wade, on Flint, Michigan, on Cop City, on a million other issues that they're just not engaging with because they don't have to, because if you don't vote for them, you're not black. I mean, like, you know what I'm saying? That's what they say, right? That's what Biden said. And so they can bank on this idea that if you're a woke person, if you're somebody who's on the right side of history, you'll vote for us. And I think that's wrong, and I think that's messed up, and I think it's gross, and I think that Biden put more black people in jail than my neighbor who has a Confederate flag. You know what I'm saying? Like he has more like power. He was a segregationist, like all these things. So I think that it really sucks that they assimilate social movements and make people think that just because they have a concern for other people besides themselves, that they have to vote for this one party, you know?
Well, I think Congress and Biden and the Democrats and the Republicans are nothing but imperial managers. And our real government is like BlackRock and State Street. The only person talking about BlackRock and State Street is Robert Kennedy. Now, he is an imperialist for sure. He is pro-Israel for sure. But the fact that he's actually saying shit about BlackRock and State Street and all these other gigantic fucking hedge funds that control so much of our economy, especially the military industrial complex, I can't see myself voting for either Biden or Trump because they're talking about bullshit. Now, maybe Robert Kennedy is just bullshitting, but he's not talking about bullshit. So I think he's bullshitting. I think he's not going to do a damn thing. If he got elected, I think he's not going to do a damn thing when he gets into office because I think he's an establishment person too. I think he's just saying the shit he's saying to get elected. But at some point in time, we have to recognize that these parties don't matter. Biden doesn't care. Biden doesn't care if he wins. Biden doesn't care if he wins. He has no fucking care whatsoever if he wins. He is managing the war machine on behalf of Lockheed Martin and, the military industrial complex and hedge funds who control a lot of these weapons manufacturers, who have large stakes in weapons manufacturers. And the business of the United States right now, more than ever, and as clearly as it's ever been, is war.
Of course.
And we are essentially a police state, imperial police state that fights wars all over the planet. And it doesn't matter. The Democrats and the Republicans know who they work for, right? They know who they work for. And, I'd love to see Cornel West or Claudia LaRiva or Jill Stein win, but they have zero chance of actually, and I don't think they're running elections to get elected, running these campaigns to get elected. I think they're running these campaigns to bring attention to their issues. So, okay, I think they know they can't get elected. I understand why they're running. But it's become so clear at this point in history what the United States is and has become, and that both parties are saying the exact, the protesters at Gaza came out. Within 2 days, the Democrats were coming out saying they're anti-Semitic, and within 3 days, the Republicans were coming out and saying they're anti-Semitic, and this is really what the Dems really want this. They're just lying. They really want this. Trying to turn it into something that the Dems, hanging around the necks of the Dems. So, they're saying the same thing about these protesters who are protesting what the international community believes is a genocide in Gaza. So I think it's clearer now than it's ever been, and I think the options as far as voting now are worse than they've ever been.
Audience members, if you're part of the CPUSA, that's your right and that's your prerogative. But I called this shit a while back when I was talking to Jay. You just can't be taken seriously. You're voting for a fucking warmonger. And I was visibly upset when Jay was telling me this. I didn't even know that those fuckers supported Biden. I don't understand it. And like I said, that's always going to be because I noticed that that's a big, to me, that's a groundswell potential if the largest unions were disaffiliated with any with this one party or this two-party state, whatever it is, I think that that will be a significant move. But there's a signal clearly that we don't want to rock that boat too much, which goes back to the same Bernie bullshit again, the Bernie 2015, which I believe was more organic. But then it's like you got the same bullshit now. 2023 Bernie is up Biden's ass. The 2020 Bernie was up Biden's ass too, just a little bit less. But it seems like now it's just like the same bullshit again. It's like we're back to square one again. Electoral politics, everything goes through one side or the other. When Trump wins, which I think Trump is going to get elected, I think the Democrats are just going to focus on being good Democrats again. How do we recruit people better? How do we get these Black people to support us better? We don't have Jim Crow Joe in anymore. We don't have the senile fucking office anymore. So maybe we can get a more attractive looking person. Maybe we can get an LGBTQ candidate. Maybe we can get a woman candidate. I mean, are they going to go the woke route again? Or are they going to just appoint people that look like me to get more votes that way? I mean, it's the fact that people are able to do that and it's successful is so sad. So that's kind of like my sentiment when it comes to like the political state. That's why I do like talking about these issues like labor issues and cultural issues in general, like not even necessarily related to the two parties, because I think once we change our minds about things, like we have to reconfigure the way we think about things. Like even honestly, I'll be full disclosure here. The protesting going on right now on the campuses, I'm skeptical of that. Call me a skeptic because it doesn't make sense. Why, like when this first happened, I mean, where was all this activity then? That would be my question, or at least the highlighting of this. It's almost like the summer of 2020 all over again. It's like, to me, they're substituting the Black Lives Matter summer with this. The pro-Palestinian marches are becoming the Black Lives Matter of 2024. I mean, that's the way I see it. That's the only way I can see it. I'm not saying that people on the ground aren't fighting for like a justifiable cause. I'm not saying that whatsoever. I'm just saying that these events, you would never convince me that these events are just completely organic, the way everything is just setting up. But I think it's a too much for the average person to take in. The fact that you tell people the most politicized, or not the most politicized, the most secure border in the fucking world, and you mean to tell me the Palestinians were able to breach the border that easily on October the 7th? Because Netanyahu is so unpopular in his own, like in Israel. And so it's out of the realm of possibility that something like that couldn't have been already like, okay, well, let's let the shit happen. How's that going to benefit somebody? Of course, we see who benefits from it. But those things aren't even spoke of. We just think of it as like October 7th. It happened, it happened, it happened. Whatever else was surrounding with the event, we just know that it happened. But there's no kind of like probing into like why it happened, how it happened, in the most secure fucking place in the world, apparently. And it's just like, we don't even talk about that. We just go to something else. And then we automatically go to like, are you pro-Palestine or you pro-Israel? We find the ways that just simplify the most complex things. And that's why I'm saying, like I said, the protesting, is it going to change anything? I seriously doubt it. I know Zach made a video. I didn't really get to watch the video, but I know that you all have comments about the video and probably the protesting that's going on during the campuses. But it's just, this is another election cycle. There's a lot of volatility. Fasten your seatbelts, people, for the summer, because something else is coming around the corner. That just seems like there's so much for the average person to take in. And this news cycle doesn't make things easier. So when people are watching this, they're reacting to everything. Everything's reaction, 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 reaction. But are we thinking things through real time? Are we anticipating things happening, or are we simply just reacting to everything we see? Like that's kind of where I'm at right now. I have my views about things. Of course, Israel is occupying Palestine. I'm not a fucking idiot. I'm not gonna say that. I mean, I acknowledge things for sure, but I try to also like I'm trying to figure out like what exactly is going on with just these events happening and just trying to make light of everything that's going on, and things just don't add up sometimes, and that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So I think well to just I think that with the protest right now, a lot of the media isn't talking about this, but divestment, the universities divesting from Israel is a major demand.
Yes.
So that is a major. They want the universities to divest, right? And we see people in Gaza, writing on their tents and stuff like, "Thank you, university students," "Thank you for staying up." And I do think that we can look at the Answer Coalition. We can look at like right after, any time that there's a big war that may happen, whether it be with Iran. Netanyahu obviously wants regional war. That's why he bombed the embassy. Mm-hmm. That's why. Okay, there was a march of return, right? A peaceful march, right? And they sniped people, and then I'm not going to I'm not going to speculate entirely. I think Scott Ritter or somebody who's much more knowledgeable about military engagement would be a better source for this. So I can say I want to really quickly speculate two different things here. One is, I think hopefully most people at this point know that area that Hamas went into on October 7th was a military zone. It was not a civilian area. What was happening there was an IDF concert for people who were, and so I think that we can also see that Israel killed their own civilians that day with the helicopter and Tomahawk missile strikes, or not Tomahawk missile, but ground missile strikes with the helicopters, armed helicopters. That they had this thing where I can't remember what the name of it is, but where they would rather have some. I don't want to speak out of and misspeak with that. So I'm going to move on to. I think that it could have been a very successful military strategy by a revolutionary force. I think that it could have also, by a resistance force. I think that also could have been something that was allowed to happen. They did have knowledge that there was a potentiality for it to happen, and they decided not to move the concert, right? I think that okay. However, with any anti-war movement, with the Answer Coalition and things like that, with the powerful and now this will go to your other question about the unions, and I think this will tie in. It takes a second for. Okay, so with democratic centralism, the day after we can have wars, we can have protests against going to war with Iran the day after things happen, right? We can, because the Democratic Central Committee is already ready to like boom, boom. Answer Coalition and PSL have been doing this for years. That's why they're able to mobilize so quickly, is because for 20 years they've been building up the capacity to do so with fellow travelers and people like that and other groups, Code Pink organizations, stuff like that. That's why it's able to mobilize so quickly. I think that you're always going to have spontaneous movements that come up when things happen. People are going to have concern about an issue. They're going to stand together. They're going to demonstrate. These are sporadic and spontaneous sometimes, but it's the organization that happens in between that connects people, that develops camaraderie, that develops networks, that develops the capacity to move and to work with international organizations, et cetera, et cetera. And in the same way that, okay, so if you can imagine World War I, if you're in a country where there's other people from another country killing people in your country, no matter, like, in that moment, devoid of all historical context, when it's just happened and you don't have all the information yet, it's easy for people who haven't really studied to be taken up and swept up in emotion in that moment, And this is the reason why democratic centralism is so important, is so that once we've developed our understanding of a situation, we don't deviate from it just because we're swept up in emotion. And I think that I think that the political consciousness has developed a lot since the first Bernie Sanders thing, but we have to be where people are at. So like PSL, for instance, they stood with that. They decided not to run in certain areas where Bernie was popular, just not because they thought like, yay, Bernie's going to be the guy, but because people were really, for the first time, being pro-socialist, and they didn't want to just nonchalantly take that, hope away from them, but they also wanted to be there when inevitably he lost, so they wouldn't fall into defeatism, so they wanted to, at that moment, knowing that he probably wouldn't do what he probably wasn't a real, socialist in a major way. They still stood with the people who stood with him, right, in that moment, until the point where they were defeated. When he was defeated, they could say, okay, this is why he was defeated. They could contextualize that for them. They could say why he wasn't enough. But if they would have in that moment, they would have not been with the people, right? If they, and so in the same way, I think that right now it takes a little while for people to catch up, and so I think that what you said about Sean Fain potentially using that as a thing could definitely be something he does during the general strike. You know what I mean? Could be definitely something he does as he realizes that more and more people are becoming fed up with the duopoly. As he really, and maybe he just maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. Maybe it's strategic. Maybe it's maybe there's something. But I do think that will be the kind of development you will see, is that more and more people go, oh, this using that as a tool would be super powerful. I think that that's going to be something that people will see. And I think in the same way, it takes a while for people to, after something that seems quite horrible, and especially the way it was being told, that there was like all of these beheadings of babies, that there was these things happening. Like if people hear that, it takes a while to process, to reallocate and re-understand. And it takes a minute for people to be down to stand up against something. They have to see the events, they have to see the things a little bit, they have to understand what's happening. And then once they realize, like 67% of people in the United States are for a ceasefire, but you wouldn't know that watching the media. You know what I mean? 150 nations, like Zach mentioned, are for ceasefire and calling this a genocide. And I mean, but this shows that the global South, the G77, voted to be part of the UN Security Council last year, but all the media covered was Modi and Biden meeting, at the exact same time. And so I think that what people are told that everyone thinks and what people actually think, it takes a while for those things to catch up, and then it takes a while for the best strategy to become the strategy of the people. And we just have to. It almost sometimes it can bypass. It doesn't happen, and sometimes it can hit at the exact right moment, and then something we never thought could happen can happen. And I think that Israel is losing in the sense that their goal was to get rid of Hamas, right? And they 80% of them, like, they have not, like Biden means. And in the sense that the global perception, even amongst their allies, is now that something has to change. And that was not on the table before. And now it is. And so in the same way with Ukraine, the sanctions have actually, gone the opposite direction and actually benefited multipolarity more so than global hegemony. And with Taiwan, we're $1.87 trillion war budget we want to spend. We've already got Green Berets in China. We're encircling all this stuff. It's only, as people start to recognize these patterns, as these patterns become more quick, like as they start to boom, 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 especially with the information age, it does take a while for people to process. But I think that the patterns start to become so recognizable that when the first time somebody hears the U.S. is imperialist, for instance, or whatever, they might be like, okay, well, this one instance. But if they keep hearing it in a short period of time, and the media isn't fast enough to catch up with the people, that's why they're banning TikTok, right? Is because TikTok is 10 times more viewed than the top U.S. media companies. And it's talking about Palestine, it's talking about these things. And so I think this gives me optimism in the fact that they see it as a threat. And if they see it as a threat, then there's potential. It may not, and maybe they're trying to destroy that potential. And I think we just shouldn't let
Yeah,
them.
I don't think so. I disagree. I don't think they can. First of all, I think Congress and the president need to form a union and challenge their employers, BlackRock and State Street, to allow them to actually govern the country. I am pro-Palestinian protests. I think the kids are great. I love kids. I love Gen Z. I mentor Gen Z people on a regular basis. I love them to death. I think they're idealistic, but I don't think that the actual government of our country, which is corporations, transnational corporations, I don't think the government of our country gives two shits what anybody thinks. And I think to pretend like they do is to pretend like we still live in a democracy, which we don't. And I don't think they have to. I think they want a regional war in the global transnational corporations wants a regional war in the Middle East to get access to those natural resources. They're going to get it. They want a war with Russia to get access to Russia's natural resources. They're going to get it. They want a war with China. They're going to get it. And the only thing that our governing institutions, Congress, Supreme Court, Biden, their only job is to keep everybody divided. So as long as people are divided a million different ways, then there won't be a unified force to literally take the country back from transnational corporations or take the globe back from transnational corporations. And I'm not optimistic. I'm sort of Gramscian in this. I believe pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. I'm not optimistic. I think the whole system could crumble in the next 100 years and probably will, but it could get worse for the people on the ground. And I just think that these transnational corporations are stateless and they're the most powerful empire in the history of the human species. And they have such sophisticated technologies of control that it's almost impossible to build a unified movement to get them to stop, because they know how to play people's biases off each other. They're good at it. They've been doing it for years. And to me, the optimal future is small communities, self-governing, separated from these people fighting these fucking wars. And with just the hope that they don't come and kill us, A, for separating, and B, that they don't engage in nuclear war and wipe the planet out. But nothing's going to happen with these Gaza protests. Nothing's going to happen. They'll be there for nothing. Happened with Occupy. Nothing happened with BLM. Nothing happened with the Iraq War protests. It's not 1965 anymore, where we did live in a democracy and the government made decisions that mattered. And I can get into a whole discussion about the transformation from Fordist Keynesianism to neoliberalism and how that was about power and control and not about money. So they decided we're never going to deal with what we dealt with in the 60s ever again. We're never going to do that again. And we're going to change the way our system works so that we never have to be threatened again. And they have achieved it. So, yeah, I'm not optimistic. But I think we can take care of each other. I think we can love on people. I think we can do things like fix people's cars at cost. I think there's things we can do, but they are, sharing and love and care and that sort of stuff. And that's during the worst times in history. That is how people survived. And we're headed to the worst times in history. Yeah.
I agree that we have to be there for each other 100%. I think that's going to be such a necessity. I do think, that Finance Capital and BlackRock and Fidelity and all these different groups, they are slowly becoming. I mean, I've heard my dad criticize BlackRock, right? I mean, but Trump criticized globalization. Trump criticized NATO. Trump criticized, I mean, they will say the things sometimes if it means if it's politically expedient to do so. They feel like they're going to get. But the fact that they can even say that means they know the people. There's some group of people that's popular amongst the people, right? At some way or another amongst some group of people, and I think that that realizing that these kinds of things happening, these kinds of weird things where Trump is criticizing NATO, if we take these moments where some people now in the Trump's camp criticizing NATO, we can start to build anti-war coalitions that, if tied into the union movement, do have the material capacity, if not yet the theoretical will. They have the capacity is potentially there to say, okay, we're we're going to do the same thing we did to get out of World War One. We're going to have a great still strike. We're going to have it is possible. It just requires the there to be an organizational farm and labor, whatever a movement to demand it, and then to have the leverage capable to do so. It's just a matter of enough people getting together to help make that happen. I just think that yes, it's very scary times. We are definitely heading into something that seems like it's going to be worse before it gets better, 100%. But I also feel like there have been times in history where things were at least equally scary, dangerous, horrifying, etc. But they could change so much. There's so many things that we could use to our advantage now that they would have wished for back then. And so I don't know. I think that history, they've gotten stronger in some ways, but their contradictions have gotten more obvious. They've gotten they have finance capital. They have all these things. They have the international system, but so has the BRICS has also risen up and is challenging their hegemony and showing that they're not invulnerable. We can see that there's all these movements happening, whether it be in India with the dock workers, or in Yemen, or in a lot of different places where people who previously would have felt like they couldn't stand up are now standing up in a unified way. And I guess these things give me that optimism. But at the end of the day, you're right that it doesn't. None of that matters unless we're taking care of each other.
Beautiful people. We will have to go very soon. There's a lot that's in my mind still. I mean, we could honestly have a whole nother conversation, and that's not even embellishment. But I do have to go places, and I'm sorry to cut the conversation short because I really enjoyed this 2 hours that we spent together today, and we'll definitely have to come back on again. I feel like I know that I learn for a fact every time we have an episode. Like, it's a learning experience for me, and the audience feels the same way. And it's really cool to see people anticipate each episode. I can't wait for the next episode to come out because you have to get notepads for this type of show, and that's beautiful. I love that people are actually willing to learn, taking different perspectives. Maybe reconsider, their own views, and a lot of stuff that we present here may go against your views, and that's okay. Even with myself, and but I will say that it was a pleasure having both of you here, different perspectives, and I can't wait for the next conversation. Like I said, there's so much more I want to talk about, but I think we were able to get into a variety of issues. And I'm very happy with the way the conversation turned out, this episode 121. But do y'all have like a final word or comment where would the audience member be able to reach you in case they had a question or comment for either one of you? And again, thanks for coming on to the show and accepting my invitation again with open arms. This has been such a fun experience for me.
Yeah, look me up on Twitter at Redneck Activist on Twitter, and just have a conversation with me. I did want to say something like, Jerry, you're almost as paranoid as I am, and I love that about you.
I definitely have paranoia. That's for sure. Jay,
Go ahead, Jay.
where can people catch you?
So you can hit me up on Facebook, Jae Carico. It's probably in the description there. Or you can email me at jmcarico@gmail.com. Yeah, anytime you want to have a conversation, I'm down. I guess if you're interested in PSL, you can go to either the Claudia and Career 24 site. If you just search that, you'll find it, or search Party for Socialism Liberation, or Liberation News, Liberation School, Breakthrough News, the People's Forum. We do have a whole lot of free educational materials. A lot of the articles are available on SoundCloud right there in the link. So you can just listen to them while you're doing your daily tasks and stuff. I have found a lot of the times where I was banging my head against the wall, the times where I was feeling like things weren't ever going to change, the times where I was feeling so defeated and stuff like that, I have felt more camaraderie since seeing what is happening in the internal affairs within the PSL. So that's brought me a great deal of optimism. And I hope, and I would just hope, if people do feel like that's something that they would be interested in any sort of way, I'm definitely down to talk about that as well.
And just a clarification, Jay, you are volunteering for PSL? I think. Are you volunteering for PSL right now?
I am a candidate member. I'm taking my 9-month. We have a 9-month course that we do every week. We do a different. Every 2 weeks we do a course, and then I'm taking other classes with them as well. There's one that Vijay Prashad and Eugene Prouvier and a number of other great thinkers are teaching on national liberation. And I'm also volunteering with the Claudia and Karina campaign as part of to get 250 signatures here in Tennessee, which is we're probably going to try to get like 700 just so we have more than we need. But that's a very low amount to get us on the ballot here in Tennessee. So that's what I'm volunteering for specifically, is the Claudia and Karina 24 campaign.
And I honestly may reach out and bring you back on for a separate show in that regard, because I did this with Tracy Carson, who's a volunteer on the ground for Cornell West 2024, and I'd like to extend that same invitation to you, because for reasons that I'm not going to get into right now. But I will say that I'm going to also link the AFC official webpage in the episode description too, the Automotive Free Clinic that I mentioned before, like off camera, based in Prattville, Alabama. And hopefully, I think I got the descriptions right from both of you. Did everything sound right when I introduced you all?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. But beautiful people, again, episode 121 has been a blast. Please share this information, this content with your friends and your family. Encourage them to subscribe for free to this channel, Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. If people are looking for an independent outlet where you don't know what you're going to get into, you never know what's going to be on here, this may be the platform for people. One of the platforms, I will say, because people obviously follow other stuff. And episode 122, who do we have on deck? We have a lot of people coming up. We have Dr. Shiva coming up again, running as an independent for president of the United States. We're going to discuss Dr. Shiva's, some of his books that he's published too. Jasmine Sherman is coming back onto the show. Sherman is also running for president of the United States under the Unicorn Party and Green Party banner. And we have Iwo Omatosin, who I've worked with, who's coming back onto the show, who's a spiritual priest. We had a really interesting conversation. We talked about Santeria, we talked about Ifa and Candomblé, Lukumi, different Afro spiritual systems based in Latin America and Africa. And so we're going to have a follow-up interview. He contributed an essay into a newly published book. I think a couple of weeks ago, the book was released. And so we're going to have a lot of important guests coming on. The Midwestern Marx people are also going to be coming back onto the show at some point. Radhika Desai is also going to be coming back onto the show. So we just have a lot of people, S.L. Canton, and the list goes on and on and on. Some colleagues of mine, Ramon Muñiz Sarmiento, Catalina Rojas Blanco, Jihad, Foucault, just people that I've worked with in the past. A lot of people coming on, activists, 95 workers, organizers, anybody that you can think of could possibly show up on this show. I just want to say, enjoy the rest of your day, and cheers, beautiful people. Thanks so much, Zac and Jay, for your contributions to this show. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. And I know we're going to talk to each other soon. And Zac, oh my gosh, we got so much to talk about. What, just some of the stuff that we were all saying. We got to have a follow-up is all I got to say. I'm sorry, this is too good. But enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers, everybody.